we're happy to have her and Dr. Hansen here. Oh, here comes the rest of my class, and here comes Jenny. All right. I was stalling because I knew y'all were on the way.
Yeah, maybe a dozen more.
That's okay. Oh, I'll see.
She's gonna make a dozen more.
And there's Dr. Portia, too.
Oh, great.
She
Yeah.
called me this morning. She's like, I'm on my way.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay. We do have door prizes. You can sign up for those at the end, and I'll draw for them if you haven't already. If you're coming in for my class or Miss Cook's class, just have a seat in
Hey, it's so good to see you. Yeah, this is a great event. I'm glad you guys are doing this. I was teaching.
I'm here to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Gregory Hansen, who's a professor of folklore and English at Arkansas State University in Greensboro, and he teaches the graduate heritage studies program. And he worked in the Florida Folklife program in the 80s and 90s, and he's one of the most passionate and talented popularizers and explainers and interpreters of folkloristic music. So I'm just thrilled to see this event place, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. Welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Oh, thanks. It's great to be here. I'm seeing a St. Augustine connection there. I lived in Jacksonville for a while, and weekend trips to St. Augustine are always great. One of my favorite cities. Oops, got some static. Let's try this again. Okay. Oh, we got. All right, I guess we're ready. And thank you, Amber, for putting this together. The Folklore Week is really a lot of fun, and I really liked the radio interview you did with Marty Scarborough at KSU. It was great, and I think you got a good variety of different things. And I see Lisa Flourish there, who's a folklore kindred spirit, expert on material culture, pottery, all kinds of good stuff here. So thank you for coming. This is great. We also, I want to mention that we do the Delta Symposium, and that takes place in April, and it's a free and open conference, but we deal with things particular to the Delta, and the theme's relevant to Halloween and some of the things you're looking at, because the theme for the 2026 Delta Symposium is Monsters, Cryptids, and the Monstrous. So you're more than welcome to come, and I really enjoyed Amber's presentation last year that she made on that. That was a wonderful collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, hopefully without static, talk to you a little bit about the idea of country music and folklore in legends and how this ties into the idea of a story world. It's something that I've been looking at, and I want to bring this a little bit to our region. So I'm going to mention some connections to ballads and legends connected to people who have Delta connections here. So we'll go ahead and talk a little about two different sites. So I'm ready for number 2. All right. Oh, what pop? Yep. There we go. Okay. So it was none other than J.R.R. Tolkien who gave us the first in-depth idea of a story world. He called it a world of stories. And we can see in Tolkien's own Middle-earth, it's an excellent representation of a story world. A story world here consists of narratives that are in intertextual relationship and established an imagined world that then becomes the setting for the tales. The story world is a secondary world, as Tolkien notes, in our everyday, ordinary, primary world is replaced in our imagination by the secondary story world. The story world establishes a vivid sense of place in our mind's eye as we travel to Middle-earth, Arrakis, the land of Oz, Akhnapatafna County, Little Norhos, and Louise Erdrich's writing, and other sites in our imagination. In her book, The Story of Myth, Sarah Ellis Johnson insightfully explores how the narrative quality of myth is situated in the larger story world of the ancient Greeks and Romans. As a folklorist, I appreciate her insights into myth-making, and I find that her writing on myth can also be applied to scholarship on legends and placemaking. And to avoid falling prey to what Roger Welsh refers to as a folklorist definitional demon, this obsession to come up with defining things, which is okay. It's a part of the discipline, and maybe a little bit relevant to Halloween because I think the demon might exist, impelling us to go around defining things. But I'll provide a brief distinction between myth and legend, and I want to see how this shows up with some legends in country music and folk music. And we'll see how the wider appeal of legendary figures in country music are connected to an imagined story world, but also how elements of these imagined narrative environments are placed into actual places within our primary world. So the story world is imposed on our primary world as part of our imagination. And the process is part of the appeal of two country tunes that I want to talk about. One is Casey Jones, which you might have heard before, and the other one is The Tale of Liddell. And bringing elements of the story world into these two distinct heritage scapes will elucidate how elements of the legend genre are connected to the power of story as expressed through the song's lyrics. Attempts to define legend stretch back centuries, and most influential articulation of the legend as a genre is grounded in the scholarship of Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. In their 19th century tome, Kinder und Hausmärchen, they outlined the three major genres of folklore, giving us myth, folktale, and legend. Folktales are fictional prose narratives, whereas myths and legends involve a scale of belief. Myths and legend can be told as either literally or figuratively true, but there are some major distinctions between the genres. Maybe we'll change the definitional demon to a better angel, helping us out. Namely, a myth is either set in the remote past or in a world that invokes this mythic time in the present. Okay? A legend is set in the recent past or in contemporary times, as we see with urban legends. Its telling of a legend lacks the charter of sacred history. And a legend is going to emerge more as a proposition for belief rather than a full-scale narrative in many situations. Linda Degg and Ella Noren assert that these propositions of belief are central, but the teller may or may not fully subscribe to the truth claims in the legend. They use the term legendry to name this process as it fuses belief with narrative. I like this idea because what they're doing is a ghost story, like a story we'll see of Liddell Bonner, will provide an opportunity to look at this idea of what's possible in our primary world, engaging with this idea of legendary. And legendary here is not so much a fixed form of story, but rather a process. And it's a process that reveals how stories involve mediation between belief and narrative. Whoops. Okay. We got cyber gremlins attacking us. It's all part of Halloween. Yeah. Contemporary folklore, right? Natalie's been visiting Arkansas State and doing some really wonderful presentations and picking up things, so it's been fun to have her up a sabbatical. But we've had some really strange things happen where I think the cyber gremlins and other gremlins are out in full force. So, okay, I think we're back on. What you see is that we can see the resonance of a continued ideas of the Grimm's distinction between folktale and legend. The folktale will evoke a story world through fights of fantasy, but it's seen as fictional. And the legend is grounded more in a curiosity about what happened in the recent past or what might happen in the future or in the present. And the Brothers Grimm write a nice quote that stays with us, that the folktale flies, the legend walks, knocks at your door, and the one can draw freely from the fullness of poetry, the other has almost the authority of history. And as we'll see, a major appeal of the story songs in country music and folk music is connected to this process as you're evoking history in the old ballads. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Versions of Casey Jones present a clearly articulated elements of the legend as a distinctive genre. William Saunders wrote the Ballad of Casey Jones in a style that shows clear connections between the legend genre and the ballad. Other folk and country tunes may emphasize the belief elements of legendary. Linda Kuhn's song, The Tale of Liddell, does not relate a precise narrative, but rather presents the legend in terms of a style that implies narrative, but it's more emphasizing emotion and artistry and imagination, as evident in the lyrics of this genre. It's a genre of the lyric folk song, and she's drawing from this previous legends in her songwriting, and we'll see how this plays out here. Versions of country and blues tunes of Casey Jones are connected to legends, but the origin of many of the stories are actually founded in the ballad that William Saunders wrote. Okay. Saunders was a black American who worked as a railroad wiper. He honored the heroics of Casey Jones by setting down a narrative poem shortly after the April 30th, 1900 wreck in Vaughan, Mississippi. Saunders used the melody of a popular tune, Jimmy Jones, to set his poem to music, and the ballad was then published in Railroaders magazine in 1908. The next year, T. Lawrence Seibert and Eddie Newton published Casey Jones, the Brave Engineer, acknowledging Saunders' contribution, although Saunders himself had not filed for copyright, unfortunately. Casey Jones became a folk hero, and legends of Casey Jones emerged in oral tradition. This shift from print to verbal art is an excellent example of Walter Ong termed secondary orality, or a process of shifting printed sources in the folk expression, experiencing the printed sources as a force of orality. Folklorists also note that Casey Jones himself is not technically a legend. Okay. Would it be easier if I just didn't use it? Okay. Okay, I'll just rev up my volume outside of the mic. That's all right. Yeah. So Casey Jones is not really a legend. He's a folk hero. And we would technically classify tales about Casey Jones either as historical legends or personal legends. And there we're staying on the right side of our definitional demons. We've got to keep them at bay here. Okay. And we're ready for the next slide. There we go. Okay, well, let's travel 130 miles west of Nashville to Jackson, Tennessee, the home of the Casey Jones Village. Jonathan Luther Jones moved to Jackson in 1883 at the age of 20, where he worked as a railroader and lived in a boarding house where he met and fell in love with Maria Joanna Janie Brady. She was always known as Janie. She was the daughter of the proprietor. In 1891, he is promoted to an engineer on the Illinois Central Railroad. That was his dream, to become an engineer. They were kind of celebrity rock stars of their time period. And following the infamous April 29 wreck in 1900, Casey Jones' home in Jackson was moved to a new location, and it became part of a museum complex located along I-40 that you've probably seen traveling between Memphis and Nashville. As Richard Paulenberg writes in Hear My Sad Story, the wreck and Casey Jones likely would have been forgotten because these kinds of accidents were surprisingly common during this era of railroad history. It was a really dangerous job, and they were wrecking trains right and left. So the museum gives an interesting site for understanding how a world of stories and songs about Jones become emplaced within a physical site in a museum and its surrounding open-air village. As Sarah Ellis Johnson, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Keith Basso, Lisa Gabbert, and other writers demonstrate, this wider sphere of songs and stories becomes emplaced and grounded in a narrative landscape. You can look at your landscape and neighborhoods as a site for stories just waiting to emerge for you. And the story world of narrative, consequently, becomes a physical place when envisioning the stories associated with Jones, and they become a vibrant reality for experiencing the tale. That's part of the reason why we visit these sites. What I find especially interesting in commemoration of J.C. Jones' last run is the vivid way that curators connect the song to the story. There are few legends about Jones prior to his death. He was a legendary engineer. And in The Treasure of Southern Folklore, Benjamin Botkin pulls an excerpt from Freeman Hubbard's Railroad Avenue. Botkin writes, even during his lifetime, Casey Jones built up a legendary reputation for himself. Dispatchers called him a fast roller, a runner who could be depended upon to get his train over the road on the card, to take advantage of every break they could give him at passing points. They knew he never dawdled at the coal chutes, water cranes, or cinder pits, or wasted time along the pike. So he was a speed demon. But it's Walter Saunders' writing of the ballad that largely immortalized the brave engineer, will also serve as an inspiration for many of the subsequent legends about Jones. Saunders penned an original Native American ballad, and his lyrics are reasonably accurate. Saunders was a fellow railroader who was based in Canton, Mississippi. As a train wiper, he cleaned the locomotives of railroad cars. Saunders knew Casey Jones well, and his lyrics also directly reflect eyewitness accounts from Sim Webb, the fireman who jumped from the train. you can actually hear recordings of Sim Webb's account of the accident. It's up online. The Library of Congress has it. So it's interesting to get that firsthand experience that Webb was able to jump and survive. And we have firsthand accounts that match what Saunders is writing about pretty well. So Saunders wrote the song as a printed ballad, and he apparently had no plans and fewer means to sell it commercially. So T. Lawrence Seibert and Eddie Newton picked up on Saunders' song. They reworked it and marketed it in 1909 as Casey Jones, the Brave Engineer. In the commercialization of the song, we can see the development of legendary associated with Jones's life and death. And Seibert adds these lines to the original ballad that don't show up in Saunders. Mrs. Jones sat on her bed, sighing, just received a message that Casey was dying. Sad to go to bed, children, hush your crying, 'cause you got another papa on the Salt Lake line. Janie Jones was rightfully offended by these lines. There's no evidence of an illicit affair, and her husband had a solid reputation as an upstanding citizen who had even converted to Catholicism to marry Mrs. Brady. And she maintained his value and honor to her throughout her life. Okay, next time. As Norm Cohen writes in his definitive tome, The Long Steel Rail, Casey, admired in his lifetime, was practically apotheosized in death for the crash, and the ballad spawned other legends following this accident. So the motif of dying with hand on the brake and one hand on the whistle cord fits into patterns of legend telling and balladeering. Imposters who claimed to be Casey Jones even appeared on the scene. Numerous stories emerged asserting that the engineer in the ballad was actually somebody else. So you have this legendary process just taking off. Larry Aaron writes how the stories of Steve Brody's wreck of the old 97 also become conflated with Casey Jones, a wreck of the Illinois Central 382. In many instances, the legendary qualities of both train wrecks are recounted not so much as directly narrated stories, but rather as snippets of memory and description. Jones is represented in popular memory as a selfless hero and even as a martyr. On the other hand, some legends also cast him as a reckless speed demon who was responsible for the wreck. People still negotiate this and talk about it in these different sites. Well, he did have a reputation for speeding, and he was suspended for speeding 9 times. It's likely, really, that the crash was unavoidable. The train that Jones struck in the Vaughan Depot was disabled due to a broken hydraulic hose, and it would have been very difficult to signal that, let alone stop the train. Okay. So to gain a deeper experience of the story world, we'll travel another 120 miles here, this time from Jackson to Water Valley, Mississippi. A little town I highly recommend. That was a nice little trip there. I met Grant Thompson, who directs the Casey Jones Railroad Museum in the town where Jones lived when he was an engineer with the Illinois Central. Okay, ready for the next one? And the museum is an adaptive reuse of the city's depot. Whoop, there we go, there's Grant. He'll give you a tour. You have to get in touch with him in advance because he's a fireman, and he's doing a lot of local history and has oral histories of all this. And if you get in touch with him, usually on like a Saturday or something, he's happy to give you a tour if you can. And I had a wonderful time spending time looking at him and would like to see some more work there. Yeah, a little shout out to Grant. But the museum's an adaptive reuse of the city's depot. To paraphrase Barbara Kirschenbach Gimlet, it has been given a second life as heritage. And the building and the surrounding area have reemerged as components of a heritage site. The museum is a repository of collectania. Thompson crafts exhibits and curates an important collection of artifacts, oral history recordings, documents, photographs, and resources integral to the region's history. Among the prized resources are the Railroad Union photograph of Jones that served as a portrait in major publications. There are copies of daily railroad orders, including ones with the engineers' names, and photos of the ill-fated old 382 known as the Cannonball. Thompson's a skilled raconteur. He's fun to talk to. And he explained that Casey Jones' prized engine was actually the much larger and more powerful 638. And this locomotive he first saw in 1893 when he attended the World's Columbia Exposition in Chicago. Okay, next one. Yep, we're doing great. If we look at relationships between different stories, as well as these intertextual connections between artifacts, museum labels, and other interpretive resources, you do enter a story world that's grounded in these museum displays. You get an experience of the past and the present. And the highlight of the tour was when Thompson placed the Columbia 78 recording of the Collins and Harlan 1910 recording onto the wind-up Victrola so that I could hear the tune played in the depot where Jones passed much of his time while living in Water Valley. This kind of engagement bridges a story world into a vibrant heritage site, and I see this as a great instance of what the rhetorical theorist Kenneth Burke terms a symbolic charge. So I think this is part of this appeal of these story worlds. You want to see an artifact, but you want the personal connection, and it becomes very brilliant because thinking, oh yeah, he probably stood here, okay? And I think this is part of this appeal of experiencing a story world and history and legend and all this intertwined, and music, of course, is going to have a big part of that. Okay, next one. The town's connections to history are further commemorated with historical markers that include how the song crossed genres of country to blues when it was performed and recorded by musicians like Furry Lewis, as well as Mississippi John Hurt. And it became part of the state's blues trail that leads through Mississippi's heritage-scape. So there's a whole network here. Thus far, though, renditions by the Grateful Dead have not been commemorated on the trail, even though I like the Grateful Dead song of it too. That one's totally inaccurate. He wasn't high on cocaine. Okay, yep, we got this. So driving in the southwesterly direction, I'm going to take you away from Water Valley and travel through Grenada, Greenwood, Itabena, Indianola, Leland, and Greenland, other legendary cities of the blues, and will take us deep into the land of the Delta blues. But the bridge at Greenville allows us to cross from the Mississippi Delta into the Arkansas Delta. Yes, we have a Delta in Arkansas. Don't forget it. That's what we're on, people, in April at our Delta Symposium. And what you have here is Highway 278 will take you near Lake Village en route to Monticello. And you have to travel almost 200 miles to get there, but it's well worth the trip. And we arrive at a major drawing point in town that relates to our next legend. 705 North Main Street, Monticello, Arkansas, is another regional drawing point. The Allen House was completed in 1906 as a mansion for Joe Lee Allen, Katie Allen, and their growing family. The Allens made their fortune developing real estate, running a livery stable and automobile dealership, and operating a hotel and a private school, and also serving as treasurer of Drew County. Their second daughter, Liddell, was 10 years old when they moved into their new home. She was known as a bright and vivacious member of the family, and her father named a town south of Monticello after her. She married Boyd Bonner in 1904. They had only one son who got to be known by his nickname Duke, and Liddell's marriage was an unhappy one. Duke was a witty newspaper columnist, and he worked as a reporter and eventually became an editor with the Associated Press radio division. He was supported by his father and mother, of course, but he became kind of a minor celebrity this way and had a lot of promising future. Unfortunately, he died young of pneumonia at the age of 28. Liddell was able to piece her life together by running a hotel and finding a prominent place as a socialite in the region, and she eventually divorced Bonner. Kind of scandalous at this time period. She had a whirlwind love affair with an executive from Texas Oil living in Minneapolis, and she dreamed that Prentice Hemingway Savage would leave his wife for her. This is a sad story coming up, as you'll see. Okay. So their 9-month affair ended tragically when Savage broke off the relationship through written correspondence with Liddell. Distraught, she made the decision to end her life. She consumed mercury cyanide, and her suicide occurred during a Christmas party in 1948, and she died at the age of 54 in the Allen House's guest room. In A Haunted Love Story, Mark Spencer provides a history of the tragedy, documenting the affair by referencing letters that survived when Liddell hid them away in the Allen House's attic. Okay. Mark Spencer's a co-owner of the house with his wife there. They bought it about 25 years ago. Spencer had purchased a house in 2007, largely from the inspiration of his wife, Rebecca. The house wasn't even for sale, but they decided, oh, I got to live here. And the family came to believe that they were indeed living in a haunted house, haunted by Liddell and possibly even Duke. So the tales of a haunting show up within the next decade. And Alan Brown's Haunted Places of the American South, he summarizes some of these supernatural legends. Eerie noises have been heard in the Ellen house as well. In the early morning hours, strange moans from the attic have disturbed the sleep of many occupants over the years. On 2 occasions, terrified tenants called the police to investigate the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from an upstairs room. Both times the police were called to the house, but the source of the noises was never found. And this is just one story of many. There's a lot of stories that people tell there. If you go down to Monticello, everybody knows the house. And a lot of people have stories about that. Some of you might have been down there. I see Amber nodding. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing place to see. So, next one. In A Ghostly Register, Arthur Miles also provides texts of legends. Stacy Clanton lived in the house with his wife from 1968 to 69 and spoke of seeing spectral presences, hearing strange noises, and discovering unlocked doors that were mysteriously locked, and encountering other eerie phenomena. These types of encounters are commonly reported in the house, and Mark Spencer writes how the house has been the subject of paranormal investigations, including sessions with Louisiana spirits and the Ghost Brothers. The Ghost Brothers episode is really fun to watch. We're seeing they get pretty freaked out. I think you'd probably pick it up on YouTube. But the Spencers opened the home for tours, and it became famous for its Halloween parties, as well as its inscription on most haunted lists in the United States. Okay, next one. And I had a tour of the meeting during the Arkansas Philological Association meeting in 2022 when I made these photographs. The October 28th visit, seems appropriate, is an example of an extensive engagement with legendary, which involves actions inspired by the hearing of legends. Folklorists get interested in ostension. You'll hear a story and then you enact it in everyday life, and you go on things like a legend trip or just experiencing something. Ostension manifests in what can think been Bill Ellis first termed these legend trips, or the visits to sites that are connected to legends. And the Spencers managed the appeal of these legend quests because everybody kept knocking on the door and wanting to come in. So what they did was they invited visitors to tour the house at set times, thereby controlling it. These ghost tours are examples here of ostensive action. So you're trying to embody the story world and pick up things with this legendary process in effect. Okay, next one. And if you're curious, I didn't experience anything supernatural other than eerie curiosity. But he does ask people to write down if you've had any experiences, and he has some interesting responses from people. At times, these visits to haunted site are not necessarily examples of ostension. The ghost encounters may open up unexpectedly. The musician Lisa Kuhn grew up in Monticello, and she had heard stories of the Ellen House that were all contributing to the site's story world. She viewed it as a spooky place when she was a young girl in the 1960s and 70s, but she had never been inside the house until she began working as a house painter. She recalls, "My experience with the Ellen House goes back to 1987 when I was asked to give a painting bid to the exterior of the house. Once there, the owner led me upstairs and through the master suite to a window that would give me access to the outside roof of the turret so that I could inspect things more closely. She said they had just opened the room up and it had been sealed for years. As I went through the room, then through the windows and started looking around, I suddenly got a feeling that someone was there with me or watching me in some way. As I turned my head slowly, something drew my eyes down to the ground below me. And there, staring up at me, was a long-haired cat, as black as night, with eyes as big as quarters, and the color of the most yellow-orange moon you've ever seen. Suddenly, chills ran down my spine. I turned and raced to the window, back to the master suite, and into the upstairs hallway. As the owner showed me around the rest of the inside of the house, she began telling me her own stories of her encounters. All the while, I could not stop thinking about the cat outside and the feeling I had of someone watching me. I told her she had a beautiful cat, and I believe her response was that she did not have a cat." Okay. Lisa Kuhn's a singer and songwriter. In A Haunted Love Story, Mark Spencer includes some additional information about this particular visit. Kuhn shared with him that the owner of the house was eager to share stories of ghosts with other visitors. And he writes that when both women entered the room that had been recently painted a light blue color, the then owner rubbed the wall and said to Lisa, "Liddell likes this color. It soothes her." She added that she and her husband tried to do things to the house that would please Liddell and the other spirits. And when they did things that make the spirits uneasy, there was more activity. Kuhn described what happened to her when her visit was over. As my visit ended, we said our goodbyes and I made my way home. All the way, my thoughts were racing with stories and visions and feelings that I had while I was there. The next morning, I abruptly awoke from a dream I was having of someone falling back as if in slow motion on the tallest ladder I had ever seen. I immediately got out of bed, grabbed a pen and paper, and started writing. I could not stop until the end. At that point, I grabbed my guitar, placed my fingers on the chord, and strummed away as if I'd played the song 1,000,000 times. And that's the song, The Tale of Liddell, that I gave to you. Her description of this process is interesting. It evokes elements of automatic writing process that you see in the work of Georgie Hyde Leeds and her husband, William Butler Yeats. They're experiencing with this in the early 20th century. And her song culminated in the country tune, The Tale of Liddell. It's well known in the area, and the melancholy lyrics blend emotion connected with heartbreak with the mystical qualities of the place. She recorded the song, and it entered in the Arkansas Songwriters Association contest that year, and it received a second place honors in the middle of the road quality as a ballad. So it's pretty well known there. And when the Spencers bought the home, she re-recorded the song, and the CD was available for sale to visitors. I think I bought the last one. And she mentions that she did take a tour of the home, and she took the camera with her, but even with freshly charged batteries, only one of the 87 photographs turned out. She tried one last time when she made a photo up in the Widow's Walk, and this time the camera's flash worked, resulting in a photo of a vortex. And she views this image as an illustration of Liddell speaking to her loud and clear. She wanted to record the song because she wanted to honor Liddell. She felt that was her contribution to her memory. So the venture into legend story world here exemplifies some larger patterns in folk and country music. Most of the narratives connected with Casey Jones are told in the third person. This attribute is a distinctive feature of the legend genre, and most of the stories would be considered, again, either personal legends or historical legends, or perhaps both. Lisa Kuhn's account, however, is different. It's in the first person, and folklorists would classify it as a memorat. A memorat is a folklore genre first coined by Carl von Sydow almost a century ago. Max von Sydow's father characterized these stories as first-person accounts that convey encounters with the supernatural. And people have picked up on this, and they're really looking at these stories of belief and the supernatural in folklore a lot these days in some really interesting ways. So von Sydow viewed these as proto-legends. He explained that others might pick up on the narratives and then tell them in the third person as legends. They can also be transmitted through oral tradition and become part of a wider body of folklore. It becomes part of the story world in ways that construct memories of the place. And we can see how these two different genres are connected to folk song genres that are going to influence musical expression. Okay. The legend fits well in the overall characteristic of the ballad as a story song. Saunders' original lyrics open with the phrase, "Come all ye," a distinctive marker of both broadside and Native American ballads. And the features shared within legend and ballads are commonly present in the story songs that are real central to country music. The appeal is integral to what the jazzer Charlie Parker affirmed when he admonished fellow musicians to give country music a chance. And he said, listen to the stories, man. It's all about the stories. I think that's a real strength of country music today. So legends and legend-like attributes of these story songs show that the ballads have been preserving history for centuries, and that legendary within the ballad tradition does remain vibrant in today's music. The stories are major contributors to the ballad's significance as a form of commemorative discourse. And the memory of the lives of Casey Jones and Liddell Allen Bonner are preserved through accounts connected with their deaths. Without the stories and songs, both of their lives would largely been forgotten. Okay, but what of the memoir genre? A first-person memoir can serve as a literary device for country music songwriters. Consider how the country gentleman's bluegrass tune shifts the narrative of the urban legend of the vanishing hitchhiker into the first person for its lyrical appeal in bringing Mary home. Other country songwriters use first-person accounts of the supernatural for their effectiveness. The tale of Liddell is a bit different from many of these story songs in country, and we do have classificatory hair-splitting here once again, where we recognize that the lyrics don't fully tell the complete narrative, but imply knowledge of the story. In this respect, the song is more of a lyric folk song rather than strictly a ballad. And the influence of lyric folk songs tend to be more present in other genres. Blues music comes to mind, but these tunes often work more like lyric poetry rather than narrative poetry. The blues ballad per se is more qualified terms, as many blues tunes are explorations of the emotional and aesthetic value experience, and they will sometimes tell the story too, so there's crossover here. But you see this showing up a lot of lyric being influenced on blues and jazz and ballad in country. Okay. Lisa Kuhn's story song reflects some of this blues aesthetic. It's more personal and evocative expression of emotions connected to lived experience. Note how it feels different than what's expressed in the old ballad that sounds more like a reporter's account of the event told in the third person. The blues elements are also evident in stylistic patterns of formal repetition and stylistic features that show her music, her vocals are evident in blues music. So when we compare Casey Jones to the tale of Liddell, we see different uses of the story worlds that form both lyrical and lived context for the music. Saunders drew from these legendary qualities of storytelling to craft a tune that shows the appeal of the ballad within country music. Lisa Kuhn's songs convey a story, but the focus is more on the inner world of emotion, memory, and imagination that evokes a larger story world centered around a haunted house in Monticello, Arkansas. Thank you. And one last one. There we go. Okay, thank you. I enjoyed giving this paper this time of year. Anybody been down to the Allen House? Yeah, what'd you think?
Okay, so my best friend who is the most superstitious Baptist was me. Drove me down there one time in October, and we did the open house tour where you actually get free reign in the house except for the private quarters, right? And we ended up in the attic, and she had one of those little ghosty phones. And she picked up a few things. I don't believe in ghosts, which is fine because I can't explain that. But it was a really cool experience. The architecture there is amazing, and I think that was my favorite part about it. Yeah. It's definitely worth it. I don't know if they still open it up to tourists.
They've closed it down to tourists. It just got unmanageable. Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah. I'm glad we went then because it was amazing. But that's just one of several houses in Arkansas that has one of those stories like that, like Corny Brook Mansion in Little Rock. You can actually stay there. That's another one that I just love.
One of the things that I'm liking about these legend trips and ghost hunting and all that, and people writing about it, is that there's a real concern with preserving the historic architecture. Because I get concerned of people going to haunted sites and creating vandalism, which can really be a problem. You know, imagine if you have a cemetery that your ancestors are buried in. You don't want people abusing the graveyards. But I think the guides and the ghost hunters are getting much more aware of that and saying, well, let's also work on historic preservation. I'm seeing this in some of the writing. And Mark Spencer's like that, too. He's got a great background in architectural history, and they're writing about that wonderful district in Monticello, which is architecture is one of the great areas in Arkansas.
But Dr. Spencer, his book, I do have a copy of that if anybody wants to read more about Liddell. I have a couple of things. It's a great story, and they told the whole thing during dinner, and
It's interesting how he writes of his own experiences because his wife Rebecca felt drawn to it right away. And she was asking about it, and people in town said, "Oh, you don't really want to know too much about that." And they're kind of hush hush. And they're saying, "Well, I really like this house, and I really am interested in it." And she actually knocked on the door of the person who had owned it, and it wasn't for sale. And it took a little bit of discussion, but it took about 2 or 3 years for them to buy it. And she was open to these possibilities and seeing things, but Mark was pretty skeptical. But then they brought in some of these ghost hunters and done it, and he'd seen some things visually that he simply couldn't explain. So his best explanation is, "I live in a haunted house." And it's interesting how these ideas of belief and memory arts are tied in, because they can be very convincing. I'm thinking, okay, I'm kind of skeptical here. What's going on? But it's just interesting to get from his perspectives and see that, very well-educated, intelligent people, their best explanation is it's haunted. It shows up in other fields too.
Now, he's a professor of English, Dr. Spencer, at UAM. He was the dean for a while. Now, what shows? Do you remember what shows?
Ghost Brothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a fun one. He really enjoyed doing that one. That's where some of the strange things happened that made him shift to thinking, "Oh, something's going on here." Yeah, and there's some other ones too. Yeah.
There's been several Arkansas homes, hotels that have been featured in shows,
Yeah.
Hotels and other ones.
I mentioned Alan Brown. He's a good writer on this. He's published a lot on ghost stories in the South. And he got so interested in this that he got interested in interviewing ghost hunters. So it has a whole book of ghost hunters of the South that you might want to check out. And then he himself got involved in ghost hunting. And he's some really interesting stories where he tells a memory of this where he wouldn't mind me sharing this with you because he shared it in an open group. But they were at the Eureka Springs Hotel. And they were looking around for a few days and enjoying Eureka and all that, and picking up on the experience, but they didn't see anything. So he went down to pick up his car and drive it in to pick it up, and his wife was still in the room. When he got back, his wife was like pale. Whoa. And he said, "What happened to you?" And she pointed to like one of these Yeti thermoses that was on the floor, and she said, "I saw that move from the table to the floor." So, no reason to suppose they're lying, but yeah, it was his actual experience. He's like, "Whoa, there's something going on here that's really interesting." Yeah. Yeah, you have that set up.
Last year, in September of last year, it was gorgeous that premiere. Yeah, the ambiance, everything. I mean, they've really embraced it, and I've noticed that towns that embrace this kind of thing benefit. I mean, even financially, we talked about Sleepy Hollow is benefiting from, the resurgence of folklore.
Yeah, these story worlds and the imagination, what brings it into place, are really key to a lot of it too. Like I like the sweatshirt you have St. Augustine again. You're not really a plant in the audience. I like the T-shirt. But if you go to St. Augustine, definitely pick up the Castillo de San Marcos, a beautiful old fort that goes back to the 1700s or so, and they preserved it in all kinds of ways. You get a nice tour of it. But if you go back into one of the quarters, back to another area, you go into a powder magazine. It looks a little like a wine cellar, and it looks really spooky. And I'm thinking, if this place isn't haunted, it should be. And sure enough, it shows up on these haunted lists. So you have this imagination going and looking at it. I didn't get any vibes on it. I'm just thinking, wow, this is pretty spooky. So, think about the places in your area that carry this ambience of spookiness, and then watch the way that the place itself becomes a generator for these legends and memorats.
We have the Fallen Blackbird Festival here, and you know what that's based on?
I don't know that one.
The New Year's Day that the thousands of blackbirds, was it thousands? Thousands of blackbirds fell from the sky onto the ground here in Beebe.
Oh, wow.
And so now we have the Fallen Blackbird, Day or whatever. So, but that's another, that eventually, the longer time goes on, the more that lore is kind of catch on and take hold and stuff like that. It is still, the birds died from blunt force trauma. Like, we did a podcast on this one too, but they died from blunt force trauma, so some families lost direction. It was just a very strange occurrence. Right before that, there was a massive fish kill. I was teaching science at the time. I was really into both of these unexplained, animal deaths or whatever. But yeah, there was a giant fish kill around Arkansas River, fallen birds and stuff. But there are massive bird kills that happen, you know, here and there around the world, and some can be explained and some cannot be explained. But again, that's part of what kind of draws us to this, and it becomes part of our lore, part of it will eventually in 100 years we'll still be talking about the blackbird ball, and we'll have probably still have some iteration of blackbird festivals.
Yeah, that's where I think that the writing on legendary rather than just legends is useful, because it's about a system or a process and connections you're making that then becomes a source for how you want to tell it. That you don't get a lot of really elaborate legends that are told. Sometimes you have them, but you usually get, I hear about this place that's haunted, and that might be the crux of the legend. But this allows you to kind of investigate and think about it as part of its persistence. Another thing that I find really interesting happening, and maybe we'll enter the land of wooiness here, but for years the idea is that if you're studying folklore, should you pay any attention to any truth claims of what's really going on? So the idea was that you step back and you have distance, say, well, this is what they believe. And that's a good way to study things. You can look at it as a social fact. But in the 1980s or so, they began to question this. And they began to recognize that skepticism of dismissing something involves all kind of belief. So you're asserting something value-free, but you're bringing your own values into it. And a folklorist named David Hufford kind of broke this open, of recognizing, take people's claims to the supernatural seriously, see what they have to say, and interpret from that perspective. And he even opens up the door that there's things going on here that we simply cannot explain, and we need to question our own biases going into it. And he was finding that this shows up in a whole range of things. And you have what in Bigfoot research is called the laughter curtain. Okay, so the laughter curtain is setting a curtain in front of yourself when you talk, because you might have a story of Bigfoot, but you don't want to be laughed at. Okay, and what Hufford is doing is, if you pull back that laughter curtain and get people to talk about it, you're going to get a richer explanation of things going on. And the part where this begins to shift into wooiness is there's a number of folklorists and anthropologists say their best explanation is something supernatural or unexplainable. And they're making those assertions in scholarship now, which I find really interesting. If you're asking, I haven't experienced anything. I guess I'm too skeptical. But I know people that said, yeah, there are things that I have no question that something they can't explain happened to them, and doctors were baffled about something, and other people saying, well, let's see what might have happened. There's an anthropologist who was in Africa and was real skeptical about researching witchcraft after being warned not to. And he went in, he got really sick, and when he came back, doctors didn't know what to do. But he got to talking to people from Africa, from that area, and they looked and said, I think you might have been cursed. And they went through a ritual, and it helped him feel better. And he said, yeah, the doctor said it was mysterious, it was ever, and he went through some of those processes, and it helped him. A whole bunch of stories like this. Rain clouds appearing out of the middle of nowhere. And people just...
I didn't see the episodes of that podcast before I was done, because there was just so many. One of my favorites that has kind of been built into the lore of the Northeast Carolina guy. And I loved studying that. Working into lore, and you can study about her. She was a seer that was at Newport, and very interesting story. There's so much in that area that you could read about and find out about. You were talking about cemeteries and how people are careful about cemeteries. I agree with that, and that's kind of why we have started, having people, or they've been locked up, and there's now, I think, a law about getting into cemeteries. Well, there is in our county, in White County. Yeah, they just started that. Don't ask me how I know. But we have a replica grave of the Yazoo City witch. It's cracked and broken and all that. Of course, people say she escaped and that's how it fell over, but probably some teenagers were over there and that's how it fell over and it got glued back together. But, I do think that keeping these stories alive the way that we are through podcasts, like we've talked about before, through videos and YouTube and things like that, it shows it creates interest in these, just like our oral storytelling traditions in the past. So.
Yeah, I like that idea that the stories and the ghost hunting can be used to support historic preservation. The other side, that it doesn't have to be the sensationalism. I think that's important and responsible.
In the 80s, you talk about cryptids, you talk about UFOs, you talk about ghosts, everyone's going to look at you like this. But now, it's more like, yeah, what do you have to say about it? And let's hear your story and let's share, what we think and believe.
And even if you're skeptical, it's just interesting to get people's accounts and see what they believe and why. I think that's an important part of it.
I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but I do believe that there are things that are unexplainable.
Yeah.
I believe that the end happening. Right? So,
Are there questions or comments from you guys?
Now, I do want to say we do have a folklore class here on campus. I think, is it running in the spring? Okay, so yeah, we do have folklore that you can take in the spring. We also have anthropology. Is it running in the spring? Anthropology is running. Both great classes if you like things like this, if you like kind of discussing these kind of topics. I will be here tomorrow. Well, first let's give Dr. Hansen a hand.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I really appreciate your attentiveness. Thank you. I'd love to.
Anybody that is interested in the Delta Symposium, I passed last school year. I'm going again this year. So talk to me about that. I think Dr. Forshak, we can ride together. I'm trying to get them to live in here. So, it's a good time. It's a real good time. It's on A State campus. So you do have books. What are the titles of your books so they can look those up?
I have a Florida Fiddler, The Life and Times of Richard Seaman. And it's stories about him that he told throughout his life. He was born in 1904 down near Kissimmee, and he made it almost to 98 years old. So you've got a whole century of experience in life as a fiddler. He never made it big, but he met a number of really important musicians and was part of this sort of grassroots tradition, and just really wonderful man to talk to. I was really glad to spend time with him. And I've written quite a bit on intangible cultural heritage, which maybe Dr. Florshoff will use in a class or pull from, but I kind of think it has a limited appeal for the general readership. I don't think I need to worry about writing movie rights for it or anything like that. That's true too. That might be an idea.
But we'll make sure we get copies of your books here at the library so kids want to check those out. Anything else you guys want to talk about with folklore or ghosts or any of that? All right, we will stay on this haunted vibe tomorrow with the ASU Witch, and I kind of gave my PAS class a sneak peek of what that's about. But it is something that I have been researching for a while, and like I said, if you want a sneak peek, the podcast that I have about it. Now, we're going to do our giveaway for today. If you haven't put your name in this box. Oh yeah, we can do it after, and then I'll just find you. Like, sign in, and I'll let some Bruce Mandy over here.
Another speaker.
Huh? Littlefield. Noah. Dr. Littlefield. Where is he? Okay, and so Dr. Littlefield is from Euler, correct? Or okay. Okay.
And as far as I know, he's going to be talking to Hoya.
Okay.
It's not a tree, and it's not a tree. Hoya was an American Indian who was, he could not read or write, but he created the
He lived in Arkansas for a while. Yeah. Yeah.
It's basically, he's
I've been to his museum. Is that it's in Oklahoma? Like there's a Sequoia museum. Yeah, I've been to that.
I'll also do a little tie-in here to the Delta Symposium because we have our guest speaker lined up, and his name is Christopher Tooten, and he's a researcher in an English department, but he looks heavily at folklore, but he's an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation, and he's written on Cherokee storytellers out in Oklahoma, and he's going to talk about monsters and mystical figures in Cherokee folklore, and he's won major awards. We're really fortunate to have him come in. So if you want to just come in and hear Dr. Tooten speak, you're more than welcome to, but I really like his writing, and he's been a lot of fun to talk to on the phone to put this together. So there's a lot of people named after Sequoia in Cherokee land, and he knows a lot of people, and really a good storyteller himself. So I'm glad to have him.
If you're interested